My hands won't stop shaking. I'm sitting in my car in the parking lot of a coffee shop I've never been to before, 3 miles from the house I grew up in, and I cannot make myself go inside. The latte I ordered through the app is probably getting cold on the counter. I don't care. I'm staring at my phone screen, reading the same text message for the 5th time, and every time I read it, the air gets a little thinner. Sweetheart, we already signed the contracts under your name. It was just easier that way. You'll understand once you see how beautiful it all comes together. Love, Mom. Just easier that way. $61,400. That's what easier costs. That's what my name is worth to them. A signature on a contract I never agreed to, for a celebration I never wanted, for a version of my future that belongs entirely to someone else. Let me back up. My name is Lena. I am 31 years old. I work as a project manager for a mid-sized construction firm in Columbus, Ohio, and I was, before this year, the kind of person who kept the peace. Not because I was weak. At least, that's what I told myself. I kept the peace because I grew up watching what happened when someone didn't. I watched my mother's face go cold and hard like concrete setting in winter. I watched my father shrink into his armchair and disappear behind the sports page. I learned very early that the fastest way to make things worse in our family was to say what you actually thought. So I smiled. I nodded. I filed things away. My fiancé, Colton, used to say I was the most patient person he'd ever met. He said it like it was a compliment. By the time all of this happened, I'd started to wonder if it was a warning. Colton and I got engaged 14 months before the wedding. We'd been together for 4 years, met through mutual friends at a backyard barbecue, fell into the easy rhythm of two people who want the same quiet things out of life. A house with a garden, a dog eventually, Sunday mornings with nowhere to be. We weren't a dramatic couple. We didn't have a cinematic love story. What we had was better. We were comfortable. We were home to each other. When we got engaged, my mother cried, happy tears, she said. She hugged me for a long time in my parents' kitchen and told me she'd been waiting for this. She said we were going to plan the most beautiful wedding Columbus had ever seen. I should have paid more attention to the word we. The trouble started, the way most trouble in my family starts, with my brother's wife. Her name is Serena. Serena married my brother, Owen, 6 years ago. Their wedding was expensive and elaborate, and the centerpiece of our family's conversation for approximately 2 years on either side of the actual date. Serena is the kind of woman who treats every room like a stage and every gathering like an audience assembled specifically for her. She's not cruel exactly. She's something more complicated than cruel. She's a person who genuinely cannot conceive of a world in which she is not the most important thing in it. Owen adores her. My parents adore her. I have spent 6 years learning to navigate around her the way you navigate around a piece of furniture in the dark. Carefully, silently, with the specific goal of not making a sound. Their 6th wedding anniversary fell 4 months before my wedding date. That's where this story really begins. It was a Tuesday evening in January when my mother called. I was at my kitchen table with the spreadsheet open, comparing catering quotes. I'd been deep in wedding planning for months at that point. Had already put down a deposit on a venue, booked a photographer, started conversations with florists. Colton and I were doing it mostly ourselves, without a planner, because we wanted it to feel like ours. Small. Intentional. Around 80 guests, people who actually mattered to us. I have the most wonderful idea, my mother said, in the voice she uses when she has already decided something and is merely informing you of it. I saved my spreadsheet. What's the idea, Mom? You know Owen and Serena's anniversary is in April, right before your wedding. I know. Well, your father and I were thinking, and Serena mentioned it first, actually, which I think shows how much she loves you. What if we combined the celebrations? Your wedding and their anniversary party all in one beautiful event. One venue, one caterer, one guest list. Efficient and so meaningful. A real family celebration. I remember the specific quality of the silence that followed. Not my silence. I was thinking, processing, trying to find the words. The silence was in the room around me, like something had been sucked out of the air. Mom, I said, very carefully. My wedding is not a venue for Serena's anniversary party. That's not how I'm framing it at all, Lena. It would be your wedding first. They would just be renewing their vows alongside you, celebrating love as a family, renewing their vows. I repeated the words back slowly. At my wedding, without asking me first. I'm asking you now, sweetheart, and I'm saying no. There was a pause. Then, let's not be hasty. Sleep on it. Talk to Colton. You might feel differently in the morning. I did not feel differently in the morning. I called my mother back the next day and said, again, clearly and without any room for interpretation, no. My wedding was my wedding. If Owen and Serena wanted to celebrate their anniversary, they were welcome to throw their own party. I would happily attend. But I was not sharing my wedding day. My mother said she understood. She did not understand. What followed over the next 6 weeks was a campaign so gradual and persistent that I almost didn't notice it happening. My father called to tell me how much it would mean to the family. Owen texted me a long message about how Serena had cried, genuinely cried at the idea of being included in such a special day. And didn't I think that was beautiful? My aunt, my mother's sister, who lives in Cincinnati and who I see maybe 3 times a year, sent me a card in the mail, an actual physical card about the importance of family unity. Colton watched all of this with increasing concern. They're not going to let this go, he said one evening, sitting across from me at the dinner table watching me read my aunt's card for the second time. I know. What do you want to do? I looked at him. He was watching me with that careful expression he gets when he's letting me work something out in my own time, not pushing, just present. That expression is one of the things I love most about him. It made me feel in that moment like I was going to cry. I want to get married, I said, to you. In a room full of people who love us, without my sister-in-law's anniversary banner hanging over the cake table. He reached across and took my hand. Then that's what we're going to do. What I didn't know, while I was fielding phone calls and maintaining my position and believing that I was winning this particular battle through sheer repetition of the word no, what I didn't know was that my mother had already moved on to a different strategy entirely. I found out on a Wednesday afternoon in February. I was at work, in a meeting that was running long, when my phone buzzed with a notification from my bank app. I glanced at it under the table. A charge had been flagged on my credit card, one I'd given my mother access to the previous year for a specific purpose, to book a hotel room for visiting relatives, and had not thought to revoke since. The charge was for a venue deposit, not my venue. I'd already paid my deposit to the Millbrook Gardens weeks earlier. This was a different venue entirely. The Grand Avery Ballroom, a sprawling event space on the east side of Columbus that I knew by reputation as the kind of place that caters to people who want to feel like they're getting married inside a chandelier. The deposit amount was $9,000. My mouth went dry. I excused myself from the meeting, walked to the hallway and called my mother. She answered on the second ring. Cheerful, unsuspecting. Hi, honey. What is the charge on my credit card from the Grand Avery Ballroom? A beat. Oh, I was going to call you about that this evening. Tell me now. Another beat, longer this time. Your father and I. And Serena helped with the vision. She has such a wonderful eye. We've been planning a beautiful combined celebration. The Grand Avery can hold up to 250 guests, and they have a coordinator on staff, so you wouldn't have to do anything. We've taken care of everything. You've taken care of everything, I repeated. The full contract is in your name. It made the most sense legally since you're the bride, but we'll all contribute, of course. How much is the full contract? Silence. Mom, how much? The venue alone is $38,000, but that includes the ceremony space and the reception hall and the bridal suite and… How much is the total? Everything. I heard her exhale. With catering and florals and the vow renewal set up for Owen and Serena, somewhere around $61,000. I leaned against the hallway wall. The fluorescent lights above me buzzed faintly. Somewhere down the corridor a printer was running, the ordinary sounds of an ordinary Wednesday, happening completely outside the glass bubble of unreality I was suddenly trapped inside. $61,000, I said, in my name. On a contract I did not sign, for a wedding I did not plan, with 250 guests I did not invite. The guest list got a little larger because of Serena's family, but I did not sign that contract. A pause. The coordinator just needed a name for the account. It's your wedding, Lena. It made sense. That's fraud, Mom. The word landed in the foam like a stone in still water. My mother went quiet in a way that was different from her other kinds of quiet. I'd grown up reading the variations of my mother's silence, the way a sailor reads weather. This one was the silence of someone who had not fully considered that the word fraud might be applicable. Nobody is committing fraud, she said finally, her voice a degree cooler. We're your family. Family doesn't sign contracts in someone else's name without their consent. Lena, you're overreacting. Cancel the contract. It's non-refundable past the initial deposit. Then you'll lose $9,000. And that will be the consequence of signing a contract without my permission. I hung up. My hands were completely still, I noticed. Whatever shaking I'd expected, it wasn't there. What I felt was something quieter and colder and more clarifying than anger. It felt like something lifting, some long-held tension finally releasing, and what was left beneath it was not relief exactly, but decision. I called Colton from the parking lot before I drove home. They booked the Grand Avery, I said, in my name. Full event. $61,000. 250 guests. Silence on his end. Then, okay. I need to think. I know. Come home. I sat in the car for another few minutes before I started the engine. I thought about the wedding I had actually planned. The one with 80 people and Millbrook Gardens, and the florist I'd found who uses locally grown flowers, and the photographer who had made me laugh during our consultation until I'd had to wipe my eyes. I thought about what it would mean to let this contract stand, to show up at the Grand Avery ballroom in a dress of my choosing, to marry the man of my choosing while Serena stood 6 feet away renewing vows to my brother under a banner that read, 6 years strong or something equally terrible. And then I thought about what it would mean to let them have the Grand Avery, to let them stand in that ballroom on the date they'd hijacked, surrounded by the 250 guests they'd invited on my dime, and wait, just wait. Because the wedding they'd planned, the one in my name with my money on my date, I wasn't going to be there. I just hadn't told them that yet. Over the next 8 weeks, I did not cancel the Grand Avery contract. I let my mother believe, through a series of carefully non-committal responses, that I was coming around. I let her send me the color palette Serena had chosen, blush and gold naturally. I responded with appropriate neutral sounds when she described the centerpieces. I attended a venue walkthrough and made notes on a clipboard and nodded at the coordinator while internally cataloging every detail of the event I had no intention of attending. What I was actually doing during those 8 weeks was planning a different wedding entirely. I called the director at Millbrook Gardens and explained my situation, not all of it, just enough. I told her I needed to move my date. She was sympathetic, more than I expected, and found us an opening 3 weeks before the Grand Avery date. We'd lose our original deposit, but I'd accepted that as the cost of what I was doing. I updated my actual guest list, 82 people. Every single one of them chosen deliberately. I contacted them individually by phone or in person. No digital trail, no group text that could find their way to the wrong eyes. I asked them, specifically, not to discuss the date change with anyone in my family. I found a different florist who could work on shorter notice. I confirmed with the photographer. I found a small catering company that specialized in intimate events and met their owner at a diner on the north side of town where I was certain I'd never run into my mother. Colton was my partner in every piece of this. He was the one who pointed out that I needed to freeze the credit card before the Avery coordinator could charge anything additional. He was the one who suggested I document every unauthorized charge, every text from my mother describing our plans, every email from the venue that had been sent to my address without my initiation. He spread everything in organized folders on his laptop, time-stamped, and sent copies to my email. "What's this for?" I asked him one night, watching him label a folder. "For the conversation we'll need to have afterward," he said simply. "Or the one we might need to have with a lawyer." I loved him so much in that moment I couldn't speak. The only person in my family I told was my grandmother, my father's mother, Grandma Ruth, who is 83 years old and has been watching my mother operate since 1987 and harbors no illusions about anyone. I called her on a Sunday afternoon and told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Good girl, tell me the date, I'll be there." She was the first one through the door at Millbrook Gardens on my actual wedding day. The morning of the Millbrook wedding, I woke up at 6 a.m. in the hotel room. Colton and I had booked separately under his name and lay still for a few minutes listening to him breathe beside me. The light coming through the curtains was thin and pale and the room was very quiet. I thought about my mother, 3 miles away in the house I grew up in, probably already awake, probably already dressed, looking forward to a day she had engineered completely without my consent. I didn't feel guilty. That surprised me. I'd expected guilt, had been bracing for it for weeks. What I felt instead was something I'd been searching for a long time without quite having a name for it. The specific, solid feeling of standing on ground that was actually mine. I got dressed with the help of my 2 closest friends, who had known the real plan for 6 weeks, and had been collectively furious on my behalf for every day of them. My maid of honor, a woman I've known since the 7th grade, zipped me into my dress and then pointed at my reflection in the mirror and said, "You look like someone who made excellent decisions." I did. We drove to Millbrook Gardens in the morning light. The venue was exactly what I'd wanted. A renovated farmhouse with a stone terrace and a garden that in late April was full of something white and flowering that I couldn't name. The photographer was already there. The florist had outdone herself. The small round tables were set for 8 with simple linens and candles and glass jars, and the whole room smelled like something clean and real. 82 people who loved us filled those seats. Grandma Ruth sat in the front row in a blue dress and cried from the moment the music started. Colton cried too, not obviously, just the quiet kind, the corner of the eye kind that he'd be mortified if you pointed out. I didn't point it out. I just held his hands and said the words I'd been saving for him for 4 years, and he said his, and none of it was performed for anyone. It was just true. We were married at 11 in the morning. The Grand Avery ballroom event was scheduled to begin at 4. My mother texted me at 12:47 p.m. "Where are you? Hair and makeup starts at 1:40. Serena's already here and everything looks beautiful." I was at that moment sitting at a table on the stone terrace of Millbrook Gardens with my husband, eating the first course of our wedding lunch, while the people we loved most talked and laughed around us in the April sunshine. I didn't respond. At 1:34 p.m., she called. I let it go to voicemail. At 2:15 p.m., my father called. I let it go to voicemail. At 2:52 p.m., Owen called. I looked at Colton across the table. He raised an eyebrow. I set the phone face down. Grandma Ruth, who was sitting 2 seats down and had watched me silence all 3 calls, reached over and patted my hand once without saying a word. At 4:06 p.m., 9 minutes after the Grand Avery event was scheduled to begin, in a ballroom full of 250 people waiting for a bride who was already married and on her 2nd glass of champagne at a completely different venue, my mother sent a text that read simply, "Lena, where are you?" I read it. I put my phone in my evening bag. I looked at my husband. "Should we get some cake?" he said. "Absolutely," I said. I want to be clear about something because I think it matters. I did not do this to punish my family. That's not entirely true. I'd be lying if I said there was no satisfaction in it. But it wasn't the point. The point was simpler than that. The point was that I had said no clearly and repeatedly, and the people who were supposed to love me had decided that my no didn't count. They had signed my name to a contract. They had spent my money. They had invited 250 people to my wedding without telling me. They had built an entire day out of my life and handed it to someone else and expected me to show up and be grateful. So I said no one final time, in the only language they'd apparently been willing to hear. The conversation, when it finally happened, was not easy. My mother called 16 times between 4 p.m. and 9 p.m. that evening. I let all of them go to voicemail and listen to the progression, confusion, then alarm, then an almost impressive quantity of tears, then a register I can only describe as wounded authority. The voice of someone who has decided that the injury done to them is the only injury in the room. I called her back the following morning. I let her speak first. She had a great deal to say. Much of it was about the money. The $9,000 deposit that had been forfeited. The vendors who charged for setup despite no event. The guests who'd arrived to an empty bridal suite. She told me it was the most humiliating night of her life. She told me Serena was devastated. She told me that I had destroyed something that couldn't be repaired. When she finished, I said, "I told you no. You agreed to come around." "I never said that. Not once. You heard what you wanted to hear. You let us plan. You planned without my consent. You signed a $61,000 contract in my name without asking me. That's not planning, that's fraud, Mom. I've documented everything. I have every charge, every text, every email. If you'd like to discuss the money you spent using my name and my credit without permission, I am prepared to have that conversation with a lawyer present." Silence. "I am not willing to do this again," I said. "Not next year, not ever. If you want a relationship with me going forward, it has to be one where my decisions are treated as final. I love you, but I am not available to be managed." There was a very long pause. "We need some time," my mother said finally, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Take all the time you need," I said. I meant it. That was 5 months ago. My mother and I have spoken several times since then, carefully, tentatively, like two people learning each other's language from scratch. It's not easy. I don't pretend it is. There are conversations I don't know yet how to have, questions about how much is repairable and how much just has to be lived with. But there's something different now, too. Something that wasn't there before. When I say no, she hears it. Colton and I moved into our house in August, a 1940s bungalow with original hardwood floors and a kitchen that needs updating, and a backyard garden that the previous owners had clearly loved. We spent our first weekend there pulling weeds together and making plans. We ordered pizza on the floor of the empty living room and talked until midnight about nothing in particular, and I thought, this is what I protected, this right here. The ordinary Sunday morning. The life that belongs to us. Grandma Ruth came to visit last month. She walked through every room slowly, touching things, and when she got to the kitchen, she leaned in the doorway and said, "This house suits you." I told her I thought so too. She stayed for dinner. We sat on the back porch while the evening cooled, and she told me about a time, 50 years ago, when she'd made a decision that cost her something and gained her everything, and I listened to every word. Before she left, she hugged me at the door and said, quietly, into my hair, "You did right, baby girl. You did exactly right." I believed her. I still do. I've thought a lot about what made this whole situation possible in the first place. Not what Serena did, not what my mother decided to do with my credit card, but what I did long before any of that. I spent years making myself easy to override. I answered every unreasonable request with a careful, diplomatic non-answer instead of a clear no. I kept the peace so consistently that the people around me stopped believing the peace could ever actually break. That's not patience. That's a slow surrender dressed up to look like maturity. The hard truth is that when you never enforce a boundary, you're not keeping the peace. You're just delaying the moment when someone finally tests whether the boundary is real. And in my family, that moment came in the form of a $61,000 contract signed in my name without my knowledge. That was the consequence of years of, let's not make this a thing. Not their consequence. Mine. What I learned from Lena, from watching her finally move, is that integrity isn't about being confrontational. It's about being consistent. Lena said no clearly and early. She said it more than once. The failure wasn't in her communication. It was in her follow-through. She believed that saying the right thing was enough. It isn't. Not with people who have learned they can simply wait you out. What changes things is action that matches the words, and that's what she finally gave them. There's something about the way she handled those 8 weeks that I keep coming back to. She didn't blow up. She didn't make a scene. She didn't spend those weeks trying to convince anyone of anything, because she'd already understood that convincing wasn't the point. The point was building the life she actually wanted, quietly, while the people trying to take it from her were busy decorating a ballroom she was never going to walk into. That's not cold. That's clear. There's a difference, and it matters. Wisdom isn't knowing the right words to say. Wisdom is knowing when words have run out and action is what's required. Lena reached that moment in a hallway outside a conference room, reading a bank notification on her phone, and instead of crying or calling her mother back in a panic, she got still. That stillness, that decision to stop reacting and start building, is the turning point in every story like this one. And courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the willingness to lose something in order to keep something more important. Lena lost a deposit. She lost the version of her family that she'd spent 31 years hoping they might become. She lost the comfortable fiction that keeping quiet was the same as keeping connection. What she kept was her wedding, her marriage, her ground. Colton was there beside her at every step, not deciding for her, not rescuing her, just present. That's what real partnership looks like. Not someone who solves your problems, but someone who makes you feel solid enough to solve them yourself. And Grandma Ruth, sitting in the front row in a blue dress, crying from the first note of music, she was there because she was told the truth. That's the other thing this story keeps reminding me. The people who show up for you are the ones you trusted enough to tell the truth to, the ones you managed, protected, and performed for. They were standing in an empty ballroom at 4 in the afternoon wondering where you went. You don't build a life by making yourself acceptable to everyone. You build it by making yourself honest with the right ones.